Welcome to the Piston Fanatic. I'm your host, Dave Dalton, and I'm excited to share my passion and perspective of our Detroit Pistons. I've been a die-hard Piston fan since the days of Dave Bing and Bob Lanier. I've also been the varsity basketball coach of a very successful program in northern Michigan. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. Please subscribe and like. Well, Piston fans, I've been waiting. I've been waiting a week. I've been watching my phone, checking my Twitter account constantly, waiting to hear whether Monty is going to get fired or whether they're going to retain him. And it's been driving me nuts. And I thought, why would I do a podcast when that should be happening any day? And the Pistons are the Kyle Anderson of the NBA. His nickname is Slo-Mo. So that's how the Piston organization and the ownership operates when they do a hiring. When they hire a new general manager, when they hire a new coach, it's like slow-mo, where some teams like the Suns, they fired their coach and they had their new coach hired like the next day. And other teams are, moving along faster, but it is so frustrating. I just don't understand how long does it take to evaluate Monty Williams. And I hope that Trajan doesn't get persuaded by somebody that has, I know the coach at the Pelicans, the current coach they have is good friends with Monty, best buddies, and that they try to pull on his emotional strings. But Monty proved that he is not a good coach, and he was very unsuccessful. He was successful when he had a stacked team. He had Miles Bridges and he had Chris Paul. He had a loaded team, Devin Booker and all those guys, and so he won a lot of games with those guys. And some people say, "Oh yeah, Monty's the coach with experienced teams and not without experienced teams." Well, he coached New Orleans and they weren't very good with him, and he's been around the league a while. So anyway, but he just proved this year, and if Trajan really gets a chance to evaluate, I don't know how you exactly do it unless you can find somebody who can honestly tell you what took place during the Pistons season. I guess you can go back and watch games, but just if you could see his decision making and his evaluation. I've talked about this multiple times about his evaluation of players, playing Isaiah Livers over Asar and playing Killian over Ivy, and just constantly his poor decisions with, you know, 5-man lineups that were horrendous. If the 5-man lineup had any success at all, but we would get destroyed when he played his 5-man lineup. So he would never stagger. His indecision about, like, all the Piston fans know that he would come on at a press conference and say he's going to do something, and then the next day he would do the opposite. And then again, I have talked about his handling of end of game situations. We were the worst team by far. In the last 5 minutes of games, we lost more games by far than anybody. Our record was worse when we were close, within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. And so he just is not a good coach. And obviously we need to have a change. And so I'm just hoping that happens. But I'm getting more and more nervous by the day. Why don't they make the decision? So, and why isn't Trajan Langdon have his introductory press conference? He hasn't had the press conference. The Pistons sent out a release saying that he was hired, and there's been even information about different guys that he's hired to add to his staff. But he hasn't. They usually have a thing for the media where all the beat writers sit down and they can ask him questions, and the owner's there with him and they present him like Troy was last year, and with when they hired Monty. And so I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know what they're waiting on. But I'm thinking they want the decision to hire Monty or not to hire Monty done before then. But again, it just concerns me that they've taken this long. And I'm not so concerned about who we might not get. I've talked about there's coaches out there that are available right now that I would like. But what about Dan Hurley to the Lakers? Man, he's going to get a boatload of money if he decides to take that job, and I think he's going to get a long contract for as much or more than Troy got, or Monty got. So that's in the works, and so we'll see who. I still like Johnny Bryant and Jaron Collins, and there's other guys out there that I really like. So let's see what happens. And like I said, I'll jump on and do a podcast. I've been just waiting for this. I've had some stuff to talk about, but I wanted to hold off. Today we're going to talk about, should the Pistons draft Tadjane Salaun? And he's a huge home run swing, and we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk a bunch about Trajan and some more stuff by. I think he was a great hire. That's just, again, you don't know. We don't know. We won't know until we see him actually do the job. But based on a lot of intel that I'm going to talk about, we know that pretty much. But first, let's talk about Trajan Salaun. That I'm sure I'm not pronouncing his name right. I've heard it pronounced different ways. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it messes me up because one guy pronounces it one way, another guy pronounces it another way. Salaun or Saloon. I've heard it both ways, but he is 6'10" with his shoes on, and he's from France, and he is got a 7'2" wingspan, and he plays his butt off. He plays really hard with lots of energy, which is a great thing, and he works. According to all reports, his work ethic is phenomenal. That he wants to be great, and so he puts in lots of time and hard work. So, but here's my thing. I've heard draft experts say that he is not going to fall past the number 8 pick. So that he would be a good pick for somebody at number 8 or 9 or 10, that he would be a great pick at that point. But why is he not a good pick at 5? If he's a good pick and if he's going to be a good player, it shouldn't matter. But he has the archetype that we need. We need, I've said 6'8" to 6'10", 6'11" guys that can play defense and shoot. He has shot pretty well, he's only like 18 years old. So that's another thing I talked about, a couple years ago when during the Ivy draft. Ivy went back for a second year of college. So did Keegan Murray, and so did a bunch of guys, and they really improved from their freshman year. They wouldn't have been lottery picks, and then the next year, their sophomore year, they became lottery picks. Benedict Mathurin, those guys all got way better. Even Jalen Williams, that plays for OKC, I think he might have gone through his junior year before he ended up being really good. So guys that are younger, there's more room that he can improve. And so he's real active. He's a pretty good athlete, but there's no guys. Here's the problem, and I feel hypocritical because we're not in a place where we want to swing for the fences and take a chance and get a player that might be a developmental player. We're not. We need players that can play right now. So last year, Cam Whitmore was my guy that I wanted. My second choice, if Cam Whitmore was going to be picked before the Pistons, which he wasn't, I wanted us to take Taylor Hendricks. Now, Taylor Hendricks has still not proven how good he's going to be, but he was 6'9", could shoot 40% on threes, consistently. He shot really well, and he could block shots. And so he's playing for Utah now. They started out him in the G League, and then they brought him along at the end of the year, and they traded some guys at the trade deadline, so they opened up some minutes for him, and they had him guard the toughest guy on the other team a lot of nights. And so we'll see how good he ends up being, but I would take him with the 5th pick this year if I could, because we need those guys that are 6'9" that can shoot, and they're rare and they're hard to find. Fascinating thing is Trajan Langdon, everybody says, oh yeah, he drafts these certain kinds of players. Well, we don't always know if he had the final say on the decisions. We actually know that he didn't have the final say, but we know that he probably had a lot of input into it. So when he got Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, so everybody says, oh yeah, he gets these 3-and-D wings, and that's what he likes because he drafted Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. Well, there's not really anybody else he got. I mean, they did get my guy Najee Marshall that I want us to sign as a free agent. They picked him up off the street, off waivers or something. Or not, he was a free agent, and so they just signed him. And he's a 6'7" guy that's turned into a lot better player. But it's going to be interesting to see on Salaun. So here's when what perked my ears up. And last year I mentioned Gigi Jackson in my draft coverage and how I thought he had a big potential to be, a steal, a big sleeper, and he ended up making the first team all rookie, and he didn't even play the first half of the season in the NBA, but he had lots of talent. He skipped his senior year of college or of high school and went to South Carolina, and he had lots of problems there and didn't play particularly well, but he was the number 1 kid in his class. And so we've seen that before where guys that are ranked high, they end up being good players, even though at somewhere along the line they maybe weren't doing so well. Even Derek Lively, that's tearing it up for the Mavs, he was ranked really high in his class, and then he went to Duke and averaged like 5 a game, and everybody said, oh, he's not that good, and then the Mavs drafted him, and he's been amazing. So, but here's Yahoo Sports had their mock draft, and they had Ricochet first, and he's still probably who my first choice for the Pistons would be, but he's probably going to be gone by number 5. Um, Sauer they had at second, Castle third, Reed Shepard 4, and Salaun at 5 to the Pistons. And so that caught my attention. And then they had Buzelis 6, and then they had Klingon and Holland and Connect and Dillingham. So those were their top 10 picks. So no ceilings. They do a mock draft, and so they have a whole bunch of guys. I don't know if they have 10 guys that work at no ceilings, or 8 guys, or 6 guys. I'm not sure, but they do a composite mock draft where everybody puts in who they think in a certain order, so they get so many points for whatever pick they're given, and they determined it. So they had Sauer number 1, Klingham number 2. So that's the thing. I'm not going to be opposed if the Pistons take him at number 5, and it still, it depends on if Ricochet's there. I would never take him at 5, but he has a lot of potential. A lot of people think that he will be gone by 5, so that's going to be interesting. But we have Duren, and there is always the big Jalen Duren question that it sounds more and more that people are down on him. I like him because he's a Piston, and he watched him play for 2 years, and he's he plays so hard on offense. He rebounds, plays so hard rebounding, but how can the coaches not teach him? How can they not just sit him and show him film daily, and then break it down into drills, and they have individual coaches for every player? And so someone needs to do it. I was a coach for over 40 years. I still coaching some, and some players have the natural instincts, for help side defense and for rim protection. They just have it innately. And so obviously he doesn't have it, but it still seems to me that he should accidentally be able to block more shots. He blocks less than 1 shot a game. And I think he was 0.8 blocks a game per game this year, and he was 0.9 his first year. And so he's like regressed. And so understandably so, people are, really down on him for that. But I mean, when a guy averages 14 points a game and 12 rebounds a game, that's pretty good when they shoot 60%. So I just don't know why he doesn't get better coaching. And you still can take Klingman, but you can't, and then what do you do with Stu? So you can play 2 centers, and even if they both can't shoot threes, although it is hard if you're going to play Asar to have one of those guys out there that can't shoot. So anyway, that remains to see what happens. But anyway, Salaun is the guy that has the most upside, in my opinion, in the draft of those guys that are the height, 6'10", that size. And again, he has an amazing motor, and he likes to play defense. He's not a great defender yet, but he tries really hard on defense, and so that, I still think I'd roll the dice if he's the guy that's available. But we'll see what Trajan Langdon does. We'll see how he decides what to do with that. But anyway, so I didn't finish with no ceilings. And so again, those guys, they spend their whole life studying the draft year round, and they had, again, Sauer, Klingham, Shepard at 3, Ricochet at 4, Connect number 5. And so I don't think these are necessarily drafting for the particular teams. They just rank their order of who they think is best player available, and then they put it into composites. They had Stephen Castle at 6, Buzella 7, Topic at 8, Dillingham at 9, and Cody Williams at 10, Holland at 11. They had Salaun at 19. So that's this draft. It's insane. So they have one draft has Salaun going to number 5 to the Pistons, and no ceilings has him at 19. So it's going to be a crazy night. And again, we still could obviously trade the pick, but that Topic, and that's another name that I've heard it, Topic or Topic. And so he partially tore his ACL, and he's had a history of knee injuries. So there's a lot of speculation that he's going to drop, and that's a very disappointing thing to me, because I was very confident that he would be, along with Sarr, those were the only two guys that I was going to say would be for sure drafted before the Pistons pick. And so that would be great because that's neither one of those are really a high need for the Pistons. So that would make somebody available that we wanted. So, but I think that he'll probably most likely fall to number 8 to the Spurs. That's my prediction for that him. But anyway, let's talk the Detroit Shock. The I had season tickets the first year that the WNBA existed. The Pistons or the Detroit had their WNBA team called the Detroit Shock. They won championships, and I had season tickets for the first season of their existence, and so it was really cool. And I went to a lot of games. And I had my best friend who passed away, God bless him, and he had courtside seats to every Shock game through for their whole history from the first season to the last season that they were there. But so there's talk about the Pistons or Detroit trying to get a team back in Detroit, and I would just love that for the people of Michigan and for especially all the girls basketball players that I care about. So let's talk about Trajan Langdon a little bit more. So he's been the one thing about it is, we were worried we're not when we weren't hiring somebody that we weren't going to be prepared for the draft. Well, obviously, when he was still employed by the Pelicans, he was constantly working on the draft. And so that was something. Well, here's the thing. I don't know if you know Amari Senkova. He writes the beat writer for the Detroit Free Press that covers the Pistons, and he has the Piston Pulse, a really good podcast. And so the other day on his podcast, he said that some Piston fans said to him that, well, we should just tank this year and get a shot at getting Cooper Flagg. And he's a prospect in next year's draft that's supposed to be phenomenal. And so Amari said, but he won't be available at 5. So what does it matter? And so that was a funny joke, Amari. So he was saying that the Pistons, even if they had the worst record, they're going to still fall to 5. And so we would never have a chance to get him. One thing I will say about the next year's draft is Ace Bailey's in it too. Those two guys, Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey. But there's 2 other guys who are just phenomenal. So there's at least 4 guys that are projected to be way better than anybody that's in this draft. And so my hope for the Pistons is that they win like 30 games and end up getting like the 5th worst record, and then they jump people like we've been jumped and get the first pick or second pick or third pick, and that we get a high pick and we get to get one of those really good players, and then we're on our way. But anyway, when the Pelicans hired David Griffin, who's now their team president, they also interviewed Trajan for that job. And they were so impressed and they loved him so much that they hired him for their general manager, and they even overpaid him for that job, for that position. They gave him more for a guy that was going to be second in command because they just were so impressed. And he's credited with making trades for picks, and he's done a real good job, working that out with the Pelicans. And again, for my research for this podcast, I listened to other teams' podcasts. So I went and listened to the Pelicans podcast, and the guys that they follow the team every day for the last 10 years, and they do a podcast 5 days a week, and they love him. They loved him. They thought he was tremendous. And one thing, it's an interesting thing though. They said that the fact that Trajan came to Detroit, that was a bad thing for them because that would mean the Pistons probably would not be trading for Brandon Ingram. So my only take about that is what they're really saying is that since Trajan was there every day, he would know that Brandon Ingram's not a guy that you would want to get. And so I found that fascinating. So they said the same thing with Cleveland. So if one of their guys get hired away to Cleveland, then they think that they might not pick him. So we'll see what happens. Oh, if Brago goes to Cleveland and he's one of the top runners for that position, James Brago, he's been the assistant for the Pelicans, assistant coach. And so they think that if he goes there, they might. The Cavs are rumored to trade for Ingram also, but that they wouldn't take him. So that makes me not want Brandon Ingram, because if the people from the Locked On Pelicans think that the guys that follow him are with him every day don't want him, then it's probably not a good deal. again, I will say that I love Najee Marshall, but nobody's going to know better if we would want to sign him and how much we value him than Trajan Langdon, because he was there with him. So they said he's a hands-on leader, an effective communicator, connects with people, and you know he motivates the front office and he delivers results. And so there's all positive things about him. Of course, that happens. Everybody's praised when they first get hired, but this is from people around the organization. He's universally praised and respected around the league, very articulate and thoughtful. Well, we know Monty Williams was the opposite of articulate, and not saying that he's not a smart guy, but his communication skills were mediocre at best. And so, um, when he was terrible at public speaking. So, and the Gore thinks he has a detailed plan to create a culture of winning, and of course everybody does. But I love Bobby Marks, who covers the NBA in the front offices um, for ESPN, and he also worked with the Nets when Trajan was there, and he thinks that he evaluates talent at a lot of different levels, and that he's great, and he connects with people really well, and players and staff and ownership, and where he's just really good, and he really valued him. So Trajan was with the general manager, assistant general manager with the Nets when they got those guys. When they had that real, they got rid of all their stars, and they had all these guys that were like late draft picks, and they end up shocking the league. They had D'Angelo Russell and some guys, but not Darius Scotland, but they had a bunch of guys that were like no name players, and they far exceeded their expectations. And so they also said that he reshaped the Pelicans medical staff, and that really perked me up. And he always wanted to know more about players and preparing them physically, and we certainly need that. We've had way too many injuries, and even just the lack of communication and like I said, just Fontecchio didn't get his toe surgery until last week, and he heard it like with over a month left in the season. And what did they wait so long for? So it makes no sense. And so I think he'll be really hands-on with the medical staff and trying to create a better thing with them. So um, a lot of people think he's very bright, and that's not something you would just say about everything. But here's the thing that the most important thing that caught my ear is that long time ago, he was done with his NBA career, and he was out shooting with Kenny Atkinson, who is now in the running for a coach. He's assistant coach for Golden State, and so they were in the gym and they were doing a workout. They were both no longer playing anymore, and he said, Trajan said, let's do a shooting workout. And he said Trajan proceeded to put him through the hardest workout he'd ever been in his life, and that he almost collapsed. And he said the guy's retired, but he had this specific routine, perfect technique, and he did all these drills. And he said that guy is locked in. And so that's what we need. The other thing I am excited about is their developmental staff at the Pelicans has been tremendous. And they have, again, a great shooting coach, but they have Trajan, who watched it, experienced the development at the Nets. He was also, with the Spurs, and they have a good developmental staff. And so he's got to witness it, and he is a perfectionist, and he, has specific workouts and techniques, and so he's got to see all that stuff. And so I just think that he's going to help bring that over. If he can't bring the shooting coach from the Pelicans over, he at least knows what they did, and he was in the gym watching those guys, work out and try to improve. So anyway, I going away this weekend. Take my daughter. She's going down to Wright State. They invited her to come to their school. It's down in Dayton, so I'm going to be taking her down there, and probably that's when they'll announce that Monty's hired or fired. So I just thought for sure they were going to do it today, Friday. I just, that's when they announced the hiring of Trajan, and I just thought that that's what would happen. A lot of people dump their things on Friday evening for some reason. So, but I thought they were going to do it earlier this week, but I'm sorry. I waited to do this podcast, but we got a lot of things to look at, see what happens, especially that the first domino that's got to fall is the decision on Monty, and then the draft is right around the corner. And again, it's just really helter skelter what the Pistons best should do. Like I said, there's lots of guys that could be there. I still, I love Shepard. I love the way he plays. He's an unbelievable shooter, and he competes defensively, and he's got a great vertical. But just look around the NBA, and you name for me all the 6'2" guys who are really good, big difference makers in the NBA. There's just not very many that even play a lot. So Klingman, I think, again, he's a good pick, but if we have Stu and Duran, what is going to happen there? So one of those guys would have to go if we drafted him, I would think. So Holland has lots of potential, but hard to be sure. Dalton Connect is a great shooter, and again, if they valued him and they see that he's the guy, he's older than everybody else in the draft, but we need shooting. So he is an amazing shooter. I mean, he shoots shots when he's not open and he can make them at a high percentage. So anyway, we'll talk more about the draft and we'll hopefully have a decision reached on Monty soon. But thank you very much for listening. I'm excited for the upcoming off season and all the things that are going to happen and be the reason that somebody feels cared for, and go Pistons.